My name is Arthur Dwyer. I am 63 years old, and I live in a small house just outside Peterborough, Ontario, a place where the summers are short and the winters remind you that nothing in this country comes easy. 3 days ago, I drove my wife, Margaret, to Peterborough Regional Health Center for what I thought was a chest cold. She had been coughing through the night, and I was worried about pneumonia. The doctor stepped out of the examination room, and I will never forget the way his hands were shaking. He grabbed my arm, pulled me into the corridor, and whispered, "Mr. Dwyer, you need to call the police right now." I stood there in that fluorescent hallway, and the floor seemed to tilt beneath me. But let me go back to the beginning, because none of this will make sense unless you understand what the last 8 years of my life looked like. Before you keep listening, I would really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button, leave a comment telling me where you are watching from, and give this video a like. Your support means everything to me. I retired from the Peterborough Utilities Commission in 2017 after 31 years as a line technician. I had a decent pension, a paid-off house, and a wife I loved more than anything on this earth. Margaret and I met in 1984 at a church picnic in Lakefield. She was a kindergarten teacher with a laugh that could fill a room. We married in 1986, had our daughter Helen in 1988, and lived what I considered a blessed, ordinary life. Everything changed on a rainy October evening in 2018. Margaret was driving home from a retired teacher's dinner in Lindsay. According to the OPP report, her car skidded off County Road 36 and rolled into a drainage ditch. When I arrived at the hospital, her brother, Donald, was already there. He told me the doctors said Margaret had suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. She would never walk again, never speak clearly again. The best I could hope for was that she might recognize my voice. I did not hesitate. I converted our dining room into a care room. I installed a hospital bed, a ceiling hoist, a shower chair. I learned how to operate a feeding tube, how to manage a catheter, how to turn her every 2 hours to prevent bed sores. The home care nurse, a woman named Pauline, came 3 times a week at first. She taught me everything. After about 4 months, Donald said we should let Pauline go because the expense was unnecessary now that I had learned the routine. I agreed, because the money mattered. Margaret's care was funded partly by her teacher's pension, partly by my own pension, and partly by a personal injury settlement of $1.2 million from the insurance company. That settlement sat in a trust account managed by a lawyer in Peterborough named Gerald Fitch. Every withdrawal required my signature and his. My days became a loop. I woke at 5:30. I checked her vitals. I prepared her morning wash, heating the water to exactly the right temperature, laying out the soft cloths, the fragrance-free soap the doctor recommended for her sensitive skin. I would talk to her the entire time. "Good morning, Maggie. It is Wednesday. Garbage day. I put the bins out last night." The doctor said she could hear me even if she could not respond with words. She communicated through blinks. 1 blink for yes, 2 blinks for no. That was our language, and I became fluent in it. I read to her every afternoon. She had always loved Alice Munro, so I read through every collection twice. I played her favorite music, Gordon Lightfoot and Stan Rogers, and sometimes Joni Mitchell, when the evening light came through the window just right. I told her about the birds at the feeder, about the snow falling on the lake, about Helen's latest phone call from Vancouver where she worked as a physiotherapist. I told her I loved her every single day, and I meant it every single time. Helen came home once a year, usually at Christmas. She would sit by her mother's bed and cry quietly, and then she would take me aside and say, "Dad, you look terrible. You need to take care of yourself." And I would say what I always said, "I am taking care of myself. I am taking care of her." Donald visited every couple of weeks. He was Margaret's only sibling, 5 years younger, a real estate appraiser who lived in Cobourg. He always showed up with Tim Hortons coffee and a way of looking around the house like he was assessing its value. About 2 years into Margaret's condition, Donald started bringing up the trust fund. "Art, that settlement money is just sitting there," he said one afternoon, stirring his double-double at my kitchen table. "There are clinics in the States, experimental treatments. We could look into it. The money is for Margaret's care, and that is exactly what it is being used for," I told him. "But think about it. 1.2 million, properly invested, could grow. I have a buddy in Toronto who runs a private care facility. Top notch. Margaret would get round-the-clock professional attention, and you could finally breathe. She is staying in her home, Donald. That is the end of it. He smiled and dropped it, the way he always did. But he always came back to it. Then there was my son-in-law's mother, Ruth Chartrand. She lived in Bridgenorth, about 20 minutes away. Ruth had been close with Margaret before the accident, and she continued to visit regularly, helping me with groceries and appointments. She was kind, reliable, and I trusted her completely. Looking back, I wonder how I could have been so blind. It was a Tuesday morning, about 3 months before the hospital visit, that changed everything. When I found something that should have set off every alarm in my head. I was changing Margaret's bedding, and a small plastic bag slipped out from under her mattress. Inside were 3 unlabeled pill bottles. I held them up to the light. The pills were small, round, pale blue. I had never seen them before. They were not part of any prescription I knew about. "Maggie, did someone give you these?" I asked, showing her the bag. Her eyes went wide. She started blinking fast, chaotically, breaking our code. "Easy, love. Calm down. Did Donald bring these?" 2 blinks. "No." "Ruth?" 1 blink. "Yes." I put the pills in my jacket pocket and told myself I would ask Ruth about them the next time she came by. But that afternoon I got distracted. The furnace broke down, and by the time the repair was done, I had forgotten about the pills entirely. I did not forget for long. 3 months later, Margaret's cough had gotten bad enough that I decided to bring her in. I loaded her into the van with the wheelchair ramp I had installed years ago, drove to the hospital, and waited while the doctors examined her. I expected antibiotics. I expected to be home by lunch. Instead, I got Dr. Anand Patel stepping into the hallway with a face like he had just witnessed something unholy. "Mr. Dwyer, the chest infection is minor, but we ran a full blood panel and a neurological workup because some of her readings were unusual. I need you to sit down." I did not sit down. "Your wife does not have a traumatic brain injury, consistent with her diagnosis. There is no significant damage to her motor cortex. There is no spinal cord injury. Her muscles show signs of recent use. She has been moving, Mr. Dwyer." I grabbed the wall. "That is impossible. She has not moved in 8 years. I bathe her, I dress her, I turn her every 2 hours. We also found benzodiazepines and a secondary sedative compound in her bloodstream. Someone has been administering controlled substances to her in precise doses, enough to mimic severe neurological impairment without causing organ failure. This is not a medical condition. This is a crime." And that is when he said it. "Call the police." I pulled the pill bottles from my jacket. I had put them there 3 months ago and never taken them out. Dr. Patel examined them and confirmed they matched the compounds found in Margaret's blood. The police arrived within 20 minutes. Detective Sergeant Colleen Firth from the Peterborough Police Service took my statement. I told her everything. The accident, the diagnosis, the trust fund, Donald's repeated interest in the money, Ruth's visits, the pills I had found. While we talked, the doctor stopped all of Margaret's unofficial medications. Dr. Patel told me that within 12 to 24 hours, she would begin regaining normal motor function and speech. 8 years of chemical imprisonment, he said quietly. It is remarkable that her body held up. That evening, I sat beside Margaret's hospital bed. She was more alert than I had seen her since before the accident. Her eyes tracked me across the room. Her fingers twitched on the blanket. "Maggie," I whispered. "Can you hear me?" She nodded. Not a blink. A nod. Her head moved and I nearly collapsed. "Who did this to you?" Her lips trembled. She was trying to form words for the first time in 8 years. Finally, in a voice like dry leaves scraping pavement, she said one word. "Everyone." Detective Firth returned the next morning with a second officer. Margaret was sitting up in bed, supported by pillows, drinking water through a straw. Her voice was still weak, but she could speak in short sentences. "Mrs. Dwyer, can you tell me what happened on the night of your accident?" Margaret closed her eyes. When she opened them, I saw something I had never seen in her before. Rage. There was no accident. Donald drugged me at dinner. I woke up in the hospital. A doctor I had never seen before, Dr. Wynne, told me I would cooperate or they would kill Arthur. They showed me photographs of him being followed. Men sitting in a truck outside our house. "Cooperate how?" the detective asked. I would pretend to be paralyzed. Arthur would manage the trust fund for my care. They would withdraw money slowly through inflated invoices for medical supplies and home modifications that never happened. My hands were shaking so hard I had to press them against my knees. How much did they take? I do not know exactly. But I heard Donald tell Ruth it was over $700,000. $700,000. From a fund meant to care for my wife. Stolen while I spent every waking hour doing exactly that. Who is Ruth Chartrand's role in this? The detective asked. Margaret looked at me with something close to pity. Ruth handled the medications. She came to the house when Arthur was busy, adjusted my doses before medical appointments so the blood work would look consistent. She also kept an eye on Arthur, reported his schedule, made sure he never suspected. And Dr. Wynne, the original attending physician? He left the country about 5 years ago. Donald said he went to the Philippines. He was paid from the trust fund as specialist consultations. Detective Firth closed her notebook. We are going to issue warrants for Donald Chartrand and Ruth Chartrand. Mr. Dwyer, do not contact either of them. I nodded, numb, but the detective was not finished. Mrs. Dwyer, your husband mentioned your daughter Helen, who lives in Vancouver. Is she involved in any of this? Margaret did not answer immediately. She looked at me, and I saw fear in her eyes. Not Helen, I said. Helen has nothing to do with this. Arthur, Margaret said softly. There is something I need to tell you about Helen. The room went very quiet. Helen stopped coming home 2 years ago. You told me she was busy with work. But that is not true, is it? I felt ice in my chest. Helen had canceled her last 2 Christmas visits. She said the flights were too expensive, that she was picking up extra shifts. I had believed her because I needed to believe her. Donald told me Helen found out about the medications. Margaret continued. She confronted Ruth during her last visit. Ruth panicked and called Donald. I heard them arguing on the phone. Donald said he would handle it. Handle it how? Detective Firth asked sharply. I do not know. Helen stopped calling after that. Arthur told me she was fine, just busy, but I could see he was worried. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor. Are you telling me that something happened to my daughter? I am telling you what I heard. I pray I am wrong. I turned to the detective. I need you to find Helen. Right now. The investigation moved fast after that. Donald and Ruth were not at their homes when police arrived. Their vehicles were gone. A neighbor in Cobourg said Donald had loaded boxes into his truck that morning and driven north. Detective Firth expanded the search. She contacted the Vancouver Police Department to check on Helen. The response came back within hours. Helen Dwyer had not reported to work at her physiotherapy clinic in 14 months. Her apartment lease had been terminated for non-payment 8 months ago. Her phone number was disconnected. My daughter had been missing for over a year. And I had not known. I had not known because someone had been sending me text messages from her number. Sorry, Dad. Crazy busy at the clinic. Love you. Merry Christmas, Dad. Wish I could be there. Messages I now realized were written by someone who was not my daughter. The police traced the phone. It was a prepaid device purchased in Barrie, Ontario. The cell tower data placed it consistently in the Kawartha Lakes area, near a property registered to a numbered company that Gerald Fitch, the trust lawyer, had helped Donald establish. Gerald Fitch, the man who co-signed every withdrawal from the trust fund. Detective Firth obtained a warrant for Fitch's office. What they found was devastating. Fake invoices for medical equipment that was never purchased. Forged receipts for home renovations that were never done. $743,000 withdrawn over 8 years. Funneled into accounts controlled by Donald, Ruth, and Fitch himself. And in Fitch's personal safe, they found something else. A file labeled Dwyer Contingency. Inside were documents detailing a plan to have Margaret declared legally incompetent, so that Donald, as her closest blood relative, could assume full control of the trust and the house. Our house. The house I had paid off over 25 years. The house where I had spent 8 years on my knees caring for the woman I loved. That night, while Margaret slept under police guard at the hospital, I sat alone in the cafeteria and wept. I had not cried in years. I had trained myself not to, because Margaret needed me to be strong. But there in that empty cafeteria with the vending machine humming and the fluorescent lights buzzing, I cried for everything. For the years I had lost. For the wife who had suffered in silence to protect me. For the daughter I might never see again. The next morning, the OPP tactical unit moved on the property near Kawartha Lakes. It was a winterized cottage on a private road, surrounded by dense bush. 2 vehicles were parked outside. Smoke rose from the chimney. I was not allowed to go. They made me wait at the Peterborough detachment with Margaret, who had insisted on coming despite barely being able to stand. We sat together in a small room with bad coffee and a television tuned to nothing. At 11:47 in the morning, Detective Firth called. "We have them." Donald resisted arrest and was taken down with a taser. Ruth surrendered immediately. Gerald Fitch was also present. "And Mr. Dwyer, your daughter is alive." I dropped the phone. Margaret caught it. "Helen is alive," she told me, and I watched her face crumble with relief. Helen had been held at the cottage for 14 months. She was malnourished and had not seen a doctor in that entire time, but she was conscious and coherent. She told police that when she confronted Ruth about the medications during her last visit home, Ruth had called Donald in a panic. Donald drove to Peterborough that same night, and the 2 of them subdued Helen, drugged her, and drove her to the cottage. They told me if I tried to escape, they would increase Mom's dosage until it killed her. Helen told the investigators. They said no one would ever suspect because Dad was right there, doing everything himself. Who would question a devoted husband? That sentence destroyed me more than anything else. My devotion had been their cover. My love had been their camouflage. In the weeks that followed, the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Donald had orchestrated the entire scheme from the beginning. The car accident in 2018 was staged. Margaret had been drugged at a family dinner, and Donald had driven her car into the ditch himself, then called 911 and told them he had found her. Dr. Nguyen, a physician with gambling debts, had been paid to forge the initial diagnosis. Ruth had been recruited to manage the medication schedule and monitor me. Gerald Fitch had handled the financial side, laundering the stolen funds through shell companies. And Lucy, the person who had been texting me as Helen for over a year, turned out to be Ruth's niece, a young woman in Barrie, who thought she was helping with a family matter, and did not realize she was covering up a kidnapping. She cooperated fully with the investigation and was not charged. Margaret's recovery was slow but steady. The physiotherapist said her muscles had not atrophied as severely as expected, because Ruth had been forcing her to walk around the house at night while I slept, keeping her body functional enough to maintain the deception. Margaret told me about those midnight walks, how Ruth would unlock the wheels of her chair and pull her upright, making her pace the hallway while whispering threats. The worst part, Margaret said one evening as we sat together in her hospital room, was hearing you talk to me every morning, telling me about the birds, reading me Alice Munro, knowing I could not tell you the truth without getting you killed. Helen was transferred to a hospital in Toronto for treatment. I drove down to see her as soon as the doctors allowed visitors. When I walked into her room, she looked 10 years older than the last time I had seen her. She was thin, pale, and had a scar above her left eye where Donald had struck her during the abduction. "Dad," she said, and started sobbing. I held my daughter for a long time without speaking. There was nothing to say that could undo what had been done. But I could hold her, and I did. The legal proceedings moved through the courts over the following months. Donald Chartrand was charged with kidnapping, forcible confinement, fraud over $5,000, administering a noxious substance, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 22 years in a federal penitentiary. Ruth Chartrand received 14 years. Gerald Fitch, who cooperated with the Crown prosecutor in exchange for a reduced sentence, received 8 years and was permanently disbarred. Dr. Nguyen was located in Cebu City through an Interpol red notice and is currently awaiting extradition. The trust fund was partially recovered. About $400,000 of the stolen money was traced and frozen. The rest had been spent or hidden in ways the forensic accountants are still unraveling. Margaret came home on a bright Saturday in April. I had cleaned the house from top to bottom, removed the hospital bed, and put our old dining table back where it belonged. She walked through the front door on her own 2 legs, leaning on a cane, and stood in the middle of the living room, looking at everything, as if seeing it for the first time in 8 years. "You kept the bird feeder," she said. "Of course I did. The chickadees would never forgive me." She laughed. It was the first time I had heard her real laugh since 2018, and it filled the room the way it always used to. Helen moved back to Ontario. She rented a small apartment in Peterborough and resumed physiotherapy practice at a clinic downtown. She comes over for dinner every Sunday. She and Margaret sit together on the back porch while I cook, and I can hear them talking through the screen door, patching together the years they lost. We do not talk about Donald or Ruth very often. There is no point in giving them more of our time. They took 8 years. They will not take another minute. Margaret still has nightmares. Some mornings she wakes up rigid, unable to move, convinced she is back in that bed and the drugs are still in her system. I hold her until the fear passes. I tell her she is safe, that she is home, that nobody will ever do this to her again. I have nightmares too. I dream about all the mornings I bathed her, talked to her, read to her, never knowing that she was screaming inside. I dream about Helen alone in that cottage, hungry and afraid, believing I had abandoned her. I wake up and I check the locks on every door. Last month, Margaret and I drove up to Algonquin Park. It was her idea. She wanted to see the autumn colors, something she had missed for 8 seasons. We parked at the Lookout Trail and I helped her along the path, her cane in one hand and my arm in the other. When we reached the top, the maples were blazing red and orange against a sky so blue it hurt. "Arthur," she said, squeezing my hand. "Yes, Maggie. Thank you for never giving up on me." I could not speak for a moment. I just looked at the trees and held her hand and breathed. We are not the same people we were before. We cannot be, but we are still here, still together, still standing in our house in Peterborough with the bird feeder in the yard and Alice Munro on the shelf and the long Canadian winter coming in the way it always does. And if that is not enough, then I do not know what is. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel for more stories that will stay with you long after you finish listening.